but maybe some other people in the audience. We're just gonna give it maybe, let's see, maybe a couple more minutes, and then I'm gonna go ahead and bring Aleenah in, also from Illinois. SF, nice, nice. A lot of California folks. But yeah, what did everybody do yesterday? If you guys like celebrate President's Day, what was the plan? If you guys had one, maybe not. Maybe you guys chilled. Hi, Vicky. How are you doing? I'm doing well. Thanks for checking in. Let's see. North Carolina, New York City. New York, let's get it. Yeah, I would love to go to New York sometime. I've actually never been to the East Coast, so I don't know if you're in this chat, Joseph, but you gotta like take me around East Coast sometime. Oh yeah, it was Lunar New Year. Yes. Yes, I celebrated that too with my fam. Sachi, what's up? Went on a road trip. That's very cool. Where'd you go? What's my favorite pizza? It's a very specific question, but my favorite pizza. Ooh, this is a hard one. I feel like I really like deep dish because I like cheese. But yeah, I would say like some sort of deep dish with maybe like some sort of meat on top. But come to North Carolina, Vicky. Yes, I definitely will sometime if you promise to take me around. But cool. Okay. Hopefully everybody has kind of flowed in to the event. What we're going to do now is I'm just going to quickly go over some things about what you'll be learning about from this event. And like if my webcam is out of focus, I do apologize for that. It's kind of wacky sometimes, but yeah, thank you everybody for being here today. We have a very special guest. Her name is Aleenah, and she is currently a content program manager and writer at Microsoft. And today we're going to be talking about how to land your dream job through storytelling. And just a little bit more about Aleenah. She is currently a writer for the Microsoft IT Showcase, and she tells stories about experts who build, deploy, and manage tools that are used by over 100,000 employees at Microsoft. And so she's probably explaining like super technical things that I could never understand in a way that I can understand. So she's super cool. And just real quick, like, why do you guys think storytelling is important? When it comes to personal branding? Anybody? Yeah, sorry, the video quality is low. Don't worry. I think Aleenah has a much better webcam than I do. So it'll go up in like a couple seconds. No one. Okay, don't worry. I'll tell you. Because like if you're able to storytell, then you're able to advocate for yourself in your role. And like I don't know if you guys have seen Joseph's post, but Joseph has always been a huge supporter of storytelling, specifically for Salesforce. And so that's why like we're really excited to bring Aleenah here to TechPod today to share with you about how you can land your dream job through storytelling too. And so with that being said, oh wait, there's a 30-second delay. So people did actually start answering the question. But yes, you guys are all correct. But yeah, I'm going to bring Aleenah onto the stage here, and then she's going to take the lead and teach you guys how to bring your storytelling to the next level. Welcome to TechPod, Aleenah.
Hi, thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today with TechPod. I'm going to share my screen very shortly. So let me know. Vicky, can you see my screen right now?
I cannot.
No? Okay. Let me try one more time. It'd be like that sometimes with technology, we all know. Okay. What
Okay,
about now?
perfect.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right.
Perfect. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with TechPod, talking about something that means a lot to me, which is storytelling and how you can use it to land your dream job or your dream internship in some cases. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about me and why storytelling matters so much. In short, storytelling is the heart and soul of what I do for my job, whether I'm at Microsoft working as a writer and content program manager, or the work that I do on the side as a writing consultant, where I work with students, early and career professionals, and small business owners, maybe like some of you on the call, to tell stories about your identity and work. And I also love questions. So if you have any questions as we go through this presentation, feel free to leave them in the chat and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So keep them coming. I ask questions for a living and I love answering them as well. But even more than storytelling, I really believe in the power of story listening. And this is the idea that whenever I get in the room with someone, now a virtual room, I'm trying to create space for them to tell me who they are and what matters to them. And thankfully, I get to do this every day because my job centers around engineers and designers and program managers and understanding their story. And this screenshot is a message I got from someone I worked with. And they said, "Your ability to listen to our story and turn it into a clear and impactful message is an art." And I hope that by the end of this talk, you feel like you have that same level of confidence in your own story and that you communicate it when it really matters. But maybe you need a little bit more convincing, and that's okay. And so this is why I think storytelling matters. The first is that everybody, literally everyone on this planet, has a story to tell. And we're always telling stories about who we are and what we do. Even think of the last time you went to the grocery store or somebody asked you how your day was or what you do for work. Even that micro interaction is an opportunity to tell a story about who you are and what moves you and what drives you. And if you know how to take advantage of that moment, it's all the better for you. But even more than storytelling, I really believe in strategic storytelling. And this is the idea that you want to tell people how you solve problems or how you bring your perspective to the table. And if you're looking at roles in tech, specifically business roles, you have to differentiate yourself from the hundreds, maybe even thousands of other people applying. And last, we all need tools for self-advocacy, which is something that Vicky said at the top of this call. And you can use stories to communicate the value and impact of your work. And believe me, I know this firsthand. I actually got promoted today, which is really exciting. But the only reason that that happened for me is because I've been telling stories for months about the impact that I'm driving, and I've been backing it up with data and anecdotes that really matter. So, in terms of what to expect today, we're going to talk about how you identify your core stories, how you can talk about your why and how your identity informs your work, and then lastly, keeping track of those storytelling moments and the metrics that matter the most to you. So, let's start with how to identify your core stories. So, what do I mean by that? When I say core stories, I'm talking about those central experiences that you're drawing from. And this could be everything from jobs and internships to class projects and capstones that you're a part of. And for me, I have a couple experiences that I know that I'm drawing on at a moment's notice. The first is my current job as a writer at Microsoft, but some other experiences that were really meaningful to me were working for my school newspaper and doing a capstone where I did user-centered design with Alaska Airlines. And ideally, you want some stories that speak to a wide range of experience. So for example, even in just these three storytelling opportunities, you have writing, you have storytelling journalistically and in tech, and you have design. And I encourage you to find stories that tell the best combination of the kind of work that you do now and the work that you want to do in the future. One thing that I can't underscore enough is that all experiences are fair game. I'm going to say that again. All your experiences are fair game. And what I mean by that is that if you work a service job, you did a research project, everything that you do is an opportunity for collaboration, for prioritization, for driving impact. And all of that matters. It doesn't have to be at a tech company like Microsoft, some name brand internship to matter. There's really value in anything that you do as long as you can communicate the value of it. And let me give you an example of this that showed up for me. So when I was a couple years ago, I was applying to my first internship at Microsoft. And I got an interview and I walk into the room and the woman has my resume on the table and she points to this line for my writing tutor position, which was something I did in college. And the line read, support students in becoming better writers, not just creating better writing. And the first thing she said in that interview was, I want to hear more about this. And suddenly I was talking to her about how I approach writing, my desire to create space for authentic storytelling, how I try to ask more questions than I answer, and how I wanted to do the same at Microsoft by really interviewing customers who use Microsoft products and understanding what they want. And even though this wasn't the traditional experience you think of being prepared for tech, I was able to communicate my value and connect it to the role, and it ended up paying off. And what's even more interesting is that a lot of people told me not to include this. They said it wasn't technical enough, it wasn't relevant enough. But in fact, this was one of the core experiences that helped me land Microsoft and my job today as a storyteller at a tech company. So now I want to talk to you about how you can tell stories around your core experiences. I call this going from a star to a comet, and it will build on that traditional star method we know and love, but with some additional components that will really take you to the next level. So let's talk about situation and task, which are the first components of the STAR method. If you don't know, the STAR method is essentially an approach to answering behavioral questions, and it stands for situation, task, action, result. So let's talk about situation and task right now. When you're thinking about your core stories and experiences, the first thing that you want to do is assess your audience and their familiarity level. So for me, for example, when I told you that if I was telling you that I'm a writer at IT Showcase, maybe you don't know what IT Showcase is, and that's totally understandable. And so I've learned that I need to tell people that it's an external storytelling platform and website full of stories about the people who build and deploy Microsoft technology. And if I don't lead with that foundation and tell people where I work, then they might not appreciate my particular role or the result. So for you, maybe you need to tell people what your program entails if it's a major that not everybody knows. Maybe you're working for a startup that not everyone has heard of, and you want to tell people what that central mission is. So just make sure that you identify those core values and those components up front so you can communicate that. Then once you have those experiences, you have that context about the place, hone in on your particular role and impact. And this is something I've heard recruiters talk about time and time again. Obviously, we're always collaborating with others. We might be on a capstone team, we might be collaborating to bring stories to life, but think about what your unique perspective and role was in the context of these projects, and how can you demonstrate your impact with 2 to 3 examples. So for example, when I was in college and I was doing UX design projects, user experience design projects, I often had the role of either content strategist or user researcher. And pretty much anytime I go into a project now, I ask, is there a component that I can have ownership over? And that's because I'm already thinking about the stories I want to tell in the future about how I drove impact. So do the same for the projects that you've already done. What was something that other people could count on you for, and how can you communicate that with recruiters or on LinkedIn or any other context? And then lastly, start to identify the lessons learned that are in particular specific to this experience. So if you were doing a case competition for school, for example, how is that different than doing a 12-week internship at a large tech company? What kind of constraints were you pushing against, and how did you work through that? And if you can talk about what you learned or how those lessons learned would map onto the next job or internship that you want, you'll be doing a lot more than the average person who's telling stories about their work. So now that we've talked about situation and task, let's talk about some components of the action and result component. As the name suggests, action is where you tell people what you actually did and really paint a clear picture of this. What did it look like to be in your position? Who were you collaborating with? What were your timelines? And maybe what were some of the challenges that you faced that you didn't anticipate? And then once you've told that great story about who you are and the initiatives that you led, it's time to get into the results. And I encourage you to make these quantitative and qualitative. So if you're interested in business roles in tech, you might be thinking about increased engagement, number of clients, viewership, etc. So talk about those numbers that you contributed to. But in addition to that, I always think about the result as, when was a moment that I felt really connected to the work that I want the person to know? So for example, if I write a story and it gets 10,000 views, that's amazing. And think about how much reach that has. But oftentimes what matters most to me is writing about communities and people who often aren't represented in the media. That means a lot to me as a person of color who hasn't always seen Pakistani women like me reflected in stories written by Microsoft and other publications. And I feel like writing stories and seeking out diverse sources is a way that I'm moving the needle. And that's something that I share in interviews because it's true to who I am, and I do think it's a part of the result. Then this is the component where we really go from a star to a comet. It's the reflection. And this is where you really want to dig into that behavioral question and not just tell them the story of what you did, but how that connects to what you want to do in the future. What did you learn that you would apply in the future? And what was unique about your approach that you would try to replicate? And we'll talk about this later, but this is the why you do what you do and why it matters. And I want to talk about the STAR method in the context of a specific example that really matters to me. And it's an article that I wrote about a Yammer community. A Yammer is an internal communications tool that Microsoft makes, if you're not familiar with it. And it's how this community was used to support employees with work visas as they were navigating the US immigration climate. So on the screen, you'll kind of see the components of the STAR method, and I think situation, task, action, result, those are a little bit more obvious. So for example, for situation, I would tell people what Microsoft IT Showcase is, that external storytelling platform piece, and how the story came to me and why it was so pertinent. In this case, this story pitch came off of the executive order in the summer that really pertain to visas for employees in tech roles. And it made a lot of people, including employees at Microsoft, feel really uncertain about what they were going to do in the future and what would happen to them. Were they at risk of losing their jobs? And so the team that ran this Yammer community came to my team and said, we really feel like this is the moment to tell the story. It's timely, and this is the place that we're driving impact, and we're ready to tell it. So that would be kind of my situation. In terms of the task, I would talk about being the lead writer, the one gathering all of the subject matter experts, and really communicating with leaders down the line who were involved in the review of the story to get it out on time. In terms of result, the things that I often talk about were views. So this one was viewed 2,600 times, shared by various Microsoft handles, Microsoft Legal, etc. But a moment that was really impactful to me was seeing this story shared at a Microsoft company-wide meeting, which are meetings that are run by our CEO. And one of the people who is the main source of my story shared it in the chat and said, this is a really, really powerful story about the technology that we developed. And even just seeing how many people in this community commented and said, we're so grateful for the work that this team does, and we're grateful that you're getting this recognition, it reminded me that I was doing the work of my life, which is telling stories that often go untold. And then when it comes to reflection, which is again that differentiator piece, let's say I was telling the story for my next job at a different company. I might tell them that I really see myself doing stories like this, which are all about using tech for good, and how I hope to take similar opportunities to amplify the work of our technology and how it's being used to drive impact, but also picking stories that really focus on the importance of empathy. And I would want my future employer to know that, because this is the most impactful story I've written, and I want them to know that this is where my strengths are, and this is the kind of work I want to do in the future. And then in terms of another thing to think about, especially when you're using the STAR method for companies like Microsoft or the Big Four, large tech companies that we know are so competitive, is to connect your work back to the role or the organization or program that you're applying to. And one of the most powerful and often overlooked ways to do this is to connect to a company's values. The great thing about company values is that this information is public knowledge. I Googled Facebook core values, and this article came up with their guiding principles. If you search Microsoft core values, you'll find our principles of being customer obsessed, diverse and inclusive, etc. And one anecdote that I really want to share is that if you interview at Amazon, they have behavioral questions that center around their corporate values. They'll say, tell me about a time that you failed fast. Tell me about a time where you took the initiative. And all of these behavioral questions are rooted in one of their values. And so if you do the work of looking up these values and starting to come up with your stories, in advance, you will be so much more prepared when you go into those interviews because you're already speaking the language of that company. And in a way, you're saying, I already see myself being here and succeeding in this role. I already think about the same things that you are. So when you're going up for those really competitive roles, keep those values at the forefront of what you do. In addition to Googling these values, which is always great, I like to go a little bit deeper and try to find these values in action. And some of the ways that I do that are finding recruiters and employees on LinkedIn and just seeing how they write about the company and its culture. What kind of words are they using to describe their work? When do they feel connected? And if you want to see what the company is saying about itself, you can also find company blogs full of employee stories. So this photo on the right is from Microsoft Life, which is our branch of employee storytelling. I also really love Spotify. If you knew me in real life, you would know that I've always wanted to be a creative director at Spotify. And I get emails every time the Spotify HR blog publishes a story. And I love reading about how they build out their technology and their products. And I hope that one day I get to write those stories too. And then lastly, the best way to understand what a company truly values is to get in touch with somebody at the companies that you're applying to and ask them. You can even say, I've read that Microsoft is known for being customer obsessed. How does that show up in your work? Or you can even ask them, what kind of values are you bringing to your work and how does that show up on your team? And it can be a really great starting point for conversation. An example of how this might show up in your core stories could be through the following example. Microsoft is really known for growth mindset. I'm sure if you followed us at all, you've seen us talk about it. And it's the idea of moving from a know-it-all culture to a learn-it-all culture, which is exemplified through Microsoft's annual hackathon. And if you haven't heard of it, I believe it's the largest private hackathon in the world. And it's a dedicated time where employees from teams around the world can come together and build whatever projects they're really excited about. And you even have the opportunity to present to leadership, which is really, really exciting. And so if you, for example, were looking at Microsoft, taking that value of growth mindset, maybe you would ask yourself, when did you take on new responsibilities at work or school? Or what steps are you taking to learn new skills, or become more comfortable with being uncomfortable? How are you taking risks? And this is a great way to start to demonstrate growth mindset in your own work. I'll give you an example that comes to mind for me. So as I've talked about, I'm a writer at Microsoft, and a lot of that has entailed focusing on writing for print or writing for web. But recently, my coworker came to me and said, I really think that our team should be embracing video. Do you want in? And honestly, I can't even tell you how frightened I was, because with writing, I know how to be a writer. And if I want to change something, I just go into the document and I edit it. But when I interview somebody, the interview is as stands, and I can essentially take something out or put it back in, but I sort of have to get the right take with somebody in the moment. And it's been such a great learning opportunity to figure out how to interview people for video and even coach talent. So that way they feel not only confident in telling their story, but they feel at ease, because it can be really scary. And if I was, for example, interviewing at another role at Microsoft, I would tell them about how I've embraced growth mindset with moving from print to video and how I would want to do the same thing on their team. So now that we've talked about core stories, let's talk about how we can identify your why and how your identity informs your work. This is a quote from a Medium article about using storytelling to ace your portfolio review. And it says, we want to shift the focus away from the work and onto how the work impacted you as a human. Which project combination tells the most compelling story about you? And I think this is such a great summary of the fact that We can tell people about the work we're doing, but we also want to tell people who we are. And doesn't that make sense? Because if you're going out for a job, or even if you were interviewing for a job, you want to know how these people would be like if they were on your team. Who would they be advocating for? What do they care about? And you want to give someone the kind of the you want to let them know that you would be a good person on their team too, and that your identity shows up in the work that you create. So some guiding questions that might help you identify your why is to think about some of the roles that you're currently in, whether it's at school or at work or in an internship, and ask yourself, what perspective do you bring to your team? And who are you advocating for, whether it's users, customers, colleagues, etc.? And are there core values that are endemic to your work, whatever that role looks like? And I want to tell you about why this why is so important through the example of a story. So this is Lizelle. As you can tell by her stole and her cords, she was a recent grad at this time, and she was going up for a role in diagnostic ultrasound. But like some of you, she was feeling a little uneasy. With COVID around, it felt like people were losing job opportunities or that there weren't as many things available. And frankly, she wasn't feeling very confident in her ability to land her story. And the stakes were really high. This was her first job out of college, and she knew that she wanted to get it right because it could change everything. And so we kind of started going through the process. I started by looking up interview questions that are specific to her field. We did so many rounds of mock interviews, and I found that she was always telling me what she did, whether it was rooming patients or scanning them to identify pathology, all the things that I'd expect, but I didn't feel like there was anything specific to her story. So I started to dig in, and I started to ask, what is your why? In her case, why are you in healthcare, and how do you approach conversations with patients? And in asking those questions, what I uncovered from her was that empathy and intention is so central to how she looks at her interactions with patients. She said that she was the first friendly face that patients would see when they'd come into a hospital, and she knew that patients were feeling really vulnerable, not just because of COVID, but because they might not know what was going to happen to them or what the procedure would entail. And she focuses on putting them at ease and ensuring that they're in the know about what would happen next, but also letting them know that they have autonomy. They can stop the procedure whenever they want. They can ask questions. And in doing that, patients feel so much more comfortable under her care. And in the process of her sharing that, a light bulb went off, and I was like, that's it. Because how many people approach their work with such intention and empathy? And I knew that because I knew her, but she wasn't telling the person interviewing her that until we started to talk about this why. And slowly we began to incorporate that into all of her core stories. If she talked about interacting with the patient, she would talk about how she would go through the entire procedure with them and explain what they would expect. She would talk about conversations she's had with patients and when they felt so much more at ease and so much more safe than when they walked in. And those were the stories that she really needed to be telling because only she could tell them. Thankfully, she was able to land that job, and even more than that, they told her that she gave one of the strongest interviews that they had ever seen. And this is such a testament that interviewing doesn't just matter for roles in tech or roles that are non-technical. As somebody doing ultrasounds, 50% of her role was certainly that practical component, but she also had to be able to express who she was and how she approached her work, and it ended up in her favor. And most importantly for me, she was more confident in telling her story, and that when she went into that room, she put it all on the table. And that's all I could ever ask for anybody. So your why, in addition to showing up to your interviews, it can also show up in other places. This is an article that Leah Shin wrote. If you don't know her, she's a product marketing manager at Microsoft. And she wrote this Medium article called Billie Eilish Taught Me How to Build Better Products. And this one line encompasses so much of who she is and her why. Let me read it. How did Billie Eilish teach me how to build better original products? I started to ask myself how my family of four, with varying and sometimes conflicting music taste, could agree on one artist to play during dinner. And then she goes on to explain how we can learn from Billie Eilish to be more creative, take more risks, etc. And through this article, it's so abundantly clear that Leah is a problem solver, but she's also an innovator. She's asking questions even more than how do we build better products, but how do we make them more original, more innovative, more relevant to the audiences that we're designing for. And in writing this piece, she started a lot of great conversations with other like-minded marketers and storytellers. An example that comes to mind for me is an article that I wrote for the Seattle Times. I'm from Seattle, so this was definitely one of my biggest career moments. And it was about the importance of storytelling in every context. And essentially, I advocated that every person, regardless of their major or discipline, should take a class on storytelling. And this is a reflection of my values because representation is everything to me. I believe you can't be what you can't see. And that is so pertinent to my work as a writer because I'm always asking who's being featured in these stories, but also who's not being included. And I always advocate for the work of people of color to be included. I advocate for end users and a range of perspectives. And even from this talk, you can tell I am a fierce advocate for storytelling, whether I'm talking to you, whether you look at my LinkedIn, whether you look at what I've written, and my values show up in every single place because I want people to know who I am, not just what I do. So know that you'll have access to this recording after the fact. It will stay up on YouTube. And I recommend taking a photo of these guiding questions or jotting one down that resonates with you. But this is a really great way to start to think about and talk about your why. And oftentimes it's easier done when you're going through it with somebody else. So you could even find a friend, a family member, or a colleague and go through these questions and talk about what kind of work you want to do for the rest of your life, or somebody that you've impacted, or this question that really matters to me, which is what is something that I talk about that what I think about a lot that nobody else talks about. And in that active reflection, I hope that you get a little bit closer to understanding your why so that you can tell others. And keep in mind that your why may change over time. You just want to figure out what's true to you right now. Okay, so now that we have core stories and we have your why, let's talk about how to document these storytelling moments and the metrics that matter the most. The first thing that I want to say about documenting stories is that you should identify the stories you want to tell, even if you're not looking for a job or internship right now. And one example that comes to mind for me is that I was having an informational chat with someone at another company, and I thought that she would just be telling me more about the work that they do. I was just curious. And even in that in that conversation, I guess, it actually became an interview, which I didn't expect. And she literally said to me, okay, well, can you tell me about a time where you wrote a story in a deadline-driven environment? And I was actually working on this slide deck. And thankfully, I had already been thinking about my stories and I was prepared for an answer. And I knew that it was so much stronger because I'm always looking at my stories and reevaluating them. So keep your stories ready because you never know when an opportunity will come up. And I'd rather you be prepared and ready to tell your story at any given moment than to wish that you had put it out on the table when you didn't. But of course, identifying your story takes time, and that's why I recommend active reflection and writing. This quote from Michelle Obama says, "Writing is a process to understand, to grow, and yes, to remember. That's perhaps the most fundamental part of becoming. Seeing this collection of stories that you'll write and embracing them for what they are, yours." And I think this is such a great reminder that we're always collecting stories and writing about them, but we have to intentionally engage with them and understand ourselves more deeply. So I hope that these strategies will help you do that. So here are some things that you can do to keep track of your stories on an ongoing basis. The first thing is to quantify your impact. In the words of Brian McKenna, don't just tell me you did user research, tell me the results of that research. How many key insights did you find? How many recommendations did you offer? And what you're measuring will vary pretty widely depending on what you do, but here are some things that you can measure. For me as a writer, I tend to look at things like number of deliverables, page views, clients, even number of places where my story has been shared. And that's really great for me to quantify the reach of my stories. And a lot of people, particularly leaders, they want to know what kind of stories are doing the best, so they will agree to write more of them or work with us in the future. If you're maybe in research or marketing, what's important for you might be verbatim feedback. It could be survey feedback or interview feedback from collaborators about the key problems that you're solving or how much better a new experience is versus an old one. So keep track of those qualitative points as well. I think they pair well with that quantitative data. And then lastly, focus on how you're creating change. So let's say you're running a social media account. Can you write down or keep track of the number of followers that were following the account before versus after? So instead of saying that you run an account with 500 followers, could you talk about how you increased followers by 30% or drove engagement up 50%? It could be anything, increasing sales, decreasing support calls, whatever that is. Talk about that change and how your work played a role in it. And I can tell you, leaders really, really focus on this stuff because sometimes those raw numbers, they don't have enough context. But if you talk about a change, it's immediately clear that you were doing something to move the needle. I also encourage you to document your wins. I actually call this my smile file, and it's essentially a folder of screenshots with memorable feedback from collaborators, customers, and coworkers. On the left, you'll see a screenshot that I've kept in my Smile file for 5 years. You can see that the date's January 2016. And it's one of the first stories I ever wrote as a reporter in college. And the person said, "This is probably the best written and best presented article I have seen produced about my work in over 16 years." And although it's been years since this happened, I continue to look back at this screenshot and remember why I do what I do. And in a way, it reminds me that I have a gift that I want to share, especially on the days when I'm feeling kind of down or unsure about my work. But you can also share feedback that you would use in an evaluation or to advocate for a promotion. I think it can go both ways. But just be sure you keep track of it in more than one place. Because, for example, I don't have access to this email anymore. So the fact that I have a screenshot means that I get to keep it forever, which is nice. And then lastly, I encourage you to iterate on your stories and look at that data regularly. I think a big mistake that people make is that they only iterate on their story when they have a job application. And although that's great, remember that point I made earlier about always working on your stories? You never know when an opportunity might come to you. A recruiter could be looking at your LinkedIn right now for your dream job, even if you're not applying. And what if you miss out on that opportunity because you're not telling stories? So it helps to have a regular touch point where you're iterating. For some people in their job, it could be that 3-month or 6-month evaluation with your manager. But what I find that works best is to block out time on your calendar every month, every quarter, etc., and really look at the stories you want to tell or the ones that you've been telling and see if you can make them a little stronger or add new data. And one way that you could do this is to have a regular reflection document. And these are the guiding questions that are on mine. And I work on this every single week. I ask myself, what have I accomplished? Can I add to my tally of deliverables, or did I take on a new project? I also ask myself, how have I demonstrated my core values this week, whether it's my own personal values or my company's? And then lastly, when did I have the most impact? When did I feel connected? Or when did I get an email from somebody that really made me feel like I'm glad that I'm a writer and I'm glad that I'm in my current role? And I encourage you to reflect in the moment because a lot of these stories are so much less vivid after the fact. It's better to be proactive and then pull them out when you need them. So if I had some parting advice for you, it would be to find places to tell your story. And I encourage you to get vulnerable about your lived experiences, your challenges, and the conversations that resonated with you. And in the process, I pretty much assure you that you will either find like-minded people and you might even catch the attention of some recruiters. And this also speaks to finding the stories that you want to tell and the storytellers that you want to hear from. My challenge is to you, if you could do maybe a few things within 24 hours of this talk, is to publish a post or article about something that matters to you. You could even post takeaways from this event if you wanted to and share things that made you think about your own story. But you could also share something that you're working on that's been on your mind. It also helps to find storytellers and content creators in your field. And if you've ever heard Dan Roth, the editor of LinkedIn, talk about this, he always says that commenting is content. And so if you're kind of nervous about sharing your own stories, find people who inspire you and comment and share your perspective, or even say that you're inspired from it. And maybe that will help you find more courage to share your own story one day, but that will still put you in conversation with people that inspire you. And then last, if there's somebody out there who's in your dream role, I challenge you to reach out to them. Share a little bit of your story and ask them about theirs and how you found them. And maybe in the process of learning about their journey, it'll help you get a little closer to that end goal, whatever it is. That's everything that I have, and these links will also be in the description box if you're watching this on YouTube. But if you ever want to have more one-on-one conversations, I offer consulting on the services listed in the bottom right corner, and you can also add me on LinkedIn. Let me know what you enjoyed about this talk or if there's anything that it reminded you of. But that's everything that I have, so I think we can open it up for questions if there's anything that y'all want to talk about. So now I'm going back to the chat. Also, the sun has set since I've been doing this, so I appreciate y'all watching the lighting shift. I'm sure that was fun. Okay. And then if you have any, if you have questions that are coming to mind now, feel free to add them. The chat is slowly updating. So let me see if there was anything I missed. Okay, so somebody said, Tarif, let me know if I'm saying that wrong. How do you effectively incorporate metrics into your stories? Which is a good question. I think for me, I typically include it in the results section of the STAR method. So in a way, it's like anytime if you're talking about something you did, it's kind of the outcome or what happened after the fact. What happened after you hit publish, launched a campaign, etc. And for me, it's as simple as after the story was published, it ultimately got 10,000 views and was shared across, these 10 Microsoft platforms. And if I can, I'll try to talk about what contributed to that. So for example, I had one of my stories got retweeted by the @Microsoft handle, which wasn't the biggest career moment of my life, but it was a big deal. And it was about Microsoft's underwater data centers. And I think the reason that story did so well is because it was about an innovative form of technology that not a lot of companies were working on. And so people were just excited by how new it was. And then ultimately, we were pitching it to relevant Microsoft handles and all of the teams involved that a leader tweeted it, and then it got the attention of the person running the Microsoft handle. So if I was telling that in an interview, I might say that it got 10,000 views, which is a result of finding the right people to amplify it. So try to put that data into context of both your work or the way that you drove impact. I know it feels kind of strange, but I think it does speak to, it's a kind of a testament to the impact of the work that you're doing. I hope that answers the question. Okay, what do you like to put on the cover letter for applications? Yeah, that's a good question. So oftentimes the questions that I'll come up with, like using the STAR method or like the comet method, I suppose, I will write them down and I'll keep track of them. And that in itself is the beginning drafts of a cover letter. The way that I approach it is I have a first paragraph that's about how I'm excited about the role and what I'll bring to the company. So for example, I told you I wanted to work at Spotify. I always talk about how I love that Spotify and music is a way to amplify underrepresented voices, and how I already do that as a writer, and I'm excited to do that with music. That's like a very specific thing about me connecting with the company's work. And then I have 1 to 2 body paragraphs about, again, the STAR method, about things I've done that are relevant to the job, and then connecting it to the work, the responsibilities of that position, and then ending with kind of like a thesis statement of like, here are the skills I want to bring to the table. I'm excited to join the band, because that's what they always say. That's like not a core value, but definitely part of their language. So if you're not writing cover letters, I encourage you to do so, especially if you're applying to a role that's slightly different than what you do now. I think it's a great place to kind of fill in the gaps. I hope that answers your question. Let me know if you have a follow-up question about cover letters. How do you effectively tell your story in coffee chats with time constraints? Oh, 15-minute time, 15-minute coffee chats. That's a really good question. So whenever I go into a coffee chat with someone I don't know, I think it's all about that first 5 minutes of framing. Like I often say, like, thank you so much for meeting with me. Um, just for context, I'm a writer at Microsoft. I do X, Y, and Z, and I discovered your work through this. Like for me, what I am often saying is, I noticed that you also work at the intersection of marketing and storytelling. And for a long time, I didn't even know that marketers were telling stories. And I'm so grateful that that world exists. And today I would love to cover X, Y, and Z. So like, I would love to cover how you blend creativity and strategy in your work, how you do this, how you do that. And as they're sharing your story, kind of like respond and share parts of yourself. Like if they share a story where they felt like they made the most impact, you can respond and say like, that's really amazing. Like I experienced something similar when I wrote a story for IT Showcase, and it was so gratifying to see that I had picked up on something that customers cared about. And even in those kind of micro interactions, you are sharing stories, but you're also demonstrating that you're listening to them. It's that storytelling and story listening at the same time. So you might not cover everything, of course, but going into it with here are 2 to 3 things I want to talk about, that makes a really big difference. Oh, okay. I guess I didn't see this question earlier. So how can we quantify information within the healthcare industry? Yeah, I mean, it does depend on your role in healthcare, I would say. But from what I know, I'm trying to think. My parents are doctors, so like, what would they say? Um, a lot of times people, even like a simple number is like, how many patients are you seeing, or like, who are you collaborating with? So like my girlfriend, she does ultrasounds for a living, and she has to work with the patient, but she also might have to collaborate with other sonographers, or she might have to present her work to the radiologist and really convince them that she's found the pathology that they're looking for. So even things like, who are you collaborating with? Is there a number of patients that you've seen? And then I also think if you see an opportunity to make a process better, like maybe you find that people are really slowed down by the check-in process. Can you propose a new like a new way of, I don't know, onboarding, problem solving, and then speak to the impact of that? Like maybe if it reduces wait times by 10 minutes, or like it enables people to get roomed faster, maybe that's something that could be like a little more quantitative in addition to the work that you do surrounding patient care or research. And if anyone has any other ideas about quantifying impact in the healthcare industry, feel free to add that in the comments, because I'm sure some of you are already doing that and might have more insight. Okay. Is booking time a free consultation? So I do typically charge for my services, and that's just for mostly also for me to keep track of my time and to honor the expertise that I have. But I will say that I do offer discounted rates for students, because I know that cost is a barrier and I would never want that to be. So if you want to book time with me, feel free to email me, or like send me a message on LinkedIn. That might be easier. And you can let me know that you're a student and what you're interested in, and I can let you know what my discounted rates are. And even my full rates, I try to keep them pretty affordable. But again, if you are, you lost your job, you really feel like you need support, I do want to help. So just tell me your story and let me know what you need, and hopefully I can do something to help. Okay. How do you tell a story through your LinkedIn profile? Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering this too. So for me, it shows up in a couple different ways, but I think that one of my favorite ways, I have like other talks about this, is your headline and your summary section. So for example, I think my headline says, writer at Microsoft, aspiring product marketing manager. It says something else. Oh, maybe HCDE alumna. And it kind of has these headlines and combination of things that I do right now that I'm known for, writing, storytelling, but also things that matter to me. So I want to be in conversation with HCDE alumna or human-centered design and engineering alumna, so I put that. And for you, you could put your aspiring role. Something I often say is journalist at heart, because it's not technically a story, but it's kind of a touch point for people to dig deeper and ask what that means. So keep in mind that you don't have to put the full story everywhere. Sometimes something can be an invitation for storytelling that it kind of invites someone to say, like, what do you mean by that? Or, oh, I saw that you were interested in creative direction. Where does that come from? And then, of course, the about section and your featured content section is such a great way to tell your story in your own terms. And the sections that I recommend, or the things I recommend hitting, is, who are you, and what are you currently doing for work, and how do you approach that work and solve problems? And so, are you the kind of person that blends creativity and strategy? Are you the kind of person that is always advocating for customers? Or are you the person that's always thinking about a system and how you can make it more efficient? And that's a great place to talk about the way that you solve problems. And then after that, you can kind of take some time to talk about what you do outside of work. So for me, in my LinkedIn summary description, I talk about being a mentor, because right now I'm involved in a mentorship program and I do mentorship in a lot of different ways. And it's really, really important to me. So it might not be the full story, but again, it's like that primer for conversation. And even if you don't feel like you land your about section the first time, I encourage you to kind of give it a shot and revisit it on a regular cadence and keep adding details that make it more vivid. And if you ask this question or you're curious about it, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can talk more, because I have some kind of specific guidelines, or we can even do a session about it for your particular case. Okay, any tips for someone who is more of a generalist and not exactly sure what they're passionate about? Yeah, this is a really good question. And the program that I studied in college, which was human-centered design and engineering, I often felt the same way, that when I was in it, the degree is so broad because you learn the whole user-centered design process, but then how do you convince an employer that you can really hone in on a specific part? So if you are more of a generalist, what I would say is, can you do some reflection about the 2 to 3 things that you always bring to the teams you're on, and what parts of them that you really enjoy? I almost like take inventory of everything I've ever done and like kind of like write it out on sticky notes or on paper. And I try to ask myself, like, what's the theme of everything I've done? And even if experiences feel either very general or very varied, chances are that you're doing them for a reason. There must be some kind of clear theme that you can draw out. And once you identify those themes or identify moments where you felt connected with the work, what I would say is, ask yourself, what are 2 to 3 things that I want to pursue next? Because I totally understand. Like, I want to explore everything. Like, if I could literally have every job, I probably would. But to kind of stay focused, I say, what do I want to learn next? And for me right now, that's video storytelling, that's marketing. And those are the things that I am really trying to figure out if I'm truly passionate about. And I kind of see it as an experiment, right? I'm in this role, working on video production, and I'm giving myself 6 months, and at the end of it, I'll evaluate, did I really like that? Am I passionate about that? Or do I need to pivot? So kind of run those experiments and see what you're really excited about, and if there's like, themes in what you already do, because chances are there probably are. I hope that answers your question. Oh yeah, thank you for resurfacing questions, everyone. I appreciate that. How do we appropriately discuss having a failure during interviews? So I'm sure you'll all have heard that question. Tell me about a time you failed. And let me tell you, the answer is not to say I'm a perfectionist. Okay, please don't say that. I'm begging you. But the most important thing to do is, in my opinion, it's to be honest about a failure or something that you struggle with, but very quickly pivoting to how you're trying to remedy that. So for example, what for myself I would call as a failure is that I'm very big picture. I'm very visionary. I'm like, what are the stories we want to tell? Who should be represented? And I love coming up with ideas and angles that we haven't done yet. But honestly, even something I struggle with is proofreading my stories. And I have a tendency to overlook the details. But what I've done and built into my process is I have a coworker who knows that about me, and I tell him, here's what I'm struggling with, here's what I need a second opinion on. And I have lots of tools in place that help me catch those things that I don't get on the first try. So I use a text-to-speech reader, and it reads my stories aloud to me. And so something I might overlook when I'm hearing it, I can say, okay, that flow actually doesn't work. Like, this paragraph needs to move up. And by building in all those components, it makes my writing stronger. So even in that case, right, I was being honest with you about something I know I need to work on, but I'm telling you how I'm addressing it. So have that model of like, what is an honest challenge that you have, but what are you doing to work through it? And even a step further, how could your employer or that place you want to go to, you could even ask them, like, what resources would you have for somebody like that? Somebody who struggles with those smaller details, and maybe they have something in place that could help you. Yeah. Okay. How do you pick and choose the stories you want to tell? That's an interesting question. Wow, how do you pick and choose the stories you want to tell? I think that everybody has stories that they can tell about themselves. For me, I try to pick stories that capture a range of skills about me. So I think for a while, like, I had a lot of stories that were centered around the same thing, which was journalistic, interview-driven writing. And I could tell you probably 15 stories about that, but that doesn't really give an honest representation of my range. So I kind of lead with, what are the skills that I want to demonstrate, and can I demonstrate them through different contexts? So for me, I have stories about how to tell stories, but I also have stories about strategy, stories about prioritization. And I try to pick the most impactful examples of where I've demonstrated those skills. Like, honestly, even asking, what do I tell the best story about? And you can even do like a simple A/B test with your friend, like share two stories that answer the same question and ask people like, which one really resonated with you? And even through that practice, I think you'll figure out what you want to tell. And it's okay if you tell certain stories when you interview in tech versus a job at a nonprofit versus jobs for school. It's okay to have a lot of different stories as long as you can grab the one that matters the most. Yeah. Okay. Oh, and then, are emojis encouraged or discouraged in LinkedIn bios? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? I'm just curious because I know that LinkedIn doesn't really support like bullet points. It's not built into the structure. So I use emojis like kind of stars or the light bulb to break up information, not just in my LinkedIn, but in posts. But I haven't really used it in any other way. So let me know if you have a particular use case. I think it's kind of the balance of finding a way to be professional, but also like picking like not just emojis, but even the media that's the most pertinent to your jobs, the jobs that you want, the job that you're in, and who you are. Yeah. Okay, I think we're okay. Yeah.
Hi,
Are we out of time?
yes,
Yeah. Hi.
we're out of time. Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And Aleenah, thank you so much for your time today. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. If you guys can hype her up in the chat, I've also added her LinkedIn in the chat as well. So please make sure to connect with her, add a personalized message and say, hey, I'm from TechPod, just came to your event and would love to connect with you. And yeah, so thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Don't forget, we have another event on Thursday, a career and mindset makeover featuring Facebook recruiter Nikki Woodall on Thursday from 5 to 6 p.m. PT. And I'll send the link in here as well if you guys want to RSVP. Make sure to give all of our TechPod pages a follow, so on our LinkedIn, on our Instagram, and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. And thank you again, Aleenah, so much for your time today. And I think we're wrapping up officially at 6, so thank you everyone for coming out.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. So great to be here.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.